and the ruins of Europe, some machines moved the war itself. Among them was one that never fired a shot, yet carried the weight of an empire's ambition. The Sd.Kfz-9, nicknamed the FAMO after its Berlin manufacturer, was not built for glory. It was built to haul the broken, the buried, and the vast. 18 tons of German steel on half-tracks, the FAMO was the strongest hauler of the Second World War. It pulled tanks from the mud, bridged rivers with its engine, and dragged the wounded machinery of conquest home to fight again. When the war ended, a few survived, standing silent in scrapyards and museums, relics of a nation's obsession with mechanical power. The FAMO endures, remembered not for destruction, but for the sheer force of motion it embodied. In the 1930s, the Reich's engineers faced a practical dilemma disguised as progress. Armoured warfare was advancing faster than its logistics. Tanks grew heavier, artillery larger, and the distances of modern campaigning stretched the limits of horses and conventional lorries. Mobility had become the currency of power, and Germany, rearming in secret, required a mechanical system that could move an army with precision and speed across the continent. The solution began not with armour, but with traction. Half-track development under the Heereswaffenamt was already yielding a family of military tractors, from the light 1-ton Sd.Kfz, 10 to the middle-weight Sd.Kfz 11. Each variant served artillery or transport roles, yet none could recover a disabled tank or tow the heaviest guns of the expanding Wehrmacht. The command ordered something unprecedented, an 18-ton prime mover capable of handling 40 tons of burden across mud, snow, and shattered roads. At the heart of the request lay the doctrines of blitzkrieg still taking shape. Rapid armoured thrusts depended not merely on tanks, but on the ability to retrieve and repair them. In practice, a mechanized spearhead that left its maintenance behind soon became a column of wrecks. What the army needed was not glamour, but guarantee, an industrial beast to follow in the wake of destruction and drag the campaign forward again. The brief demanded both power and reach, a machine able to tow the massive 24-centimetre K3 artillery piece, haul bridging equipment, and later recover panzers that outweighed most locomotives. Such a vehicle would be longer than a bus, fitted with a Maybach 12-cylinder engine, and required the traction of tracks without sacrificing the road manners of tyres. The challenge drew the attention of several firms, but one possessed the experience and capacity to answer it: the Fahrzeug- und Motorenwerke GmbH of Breslau, better known by its abbreviation FAMO. The engineers of FAMO had spent years building heavy industrial engines and experimental half-tracks. Their plant, a landscape of riveted girders and mechanical rhythm, became the crucible of the new design. Early studies revealed the paradox of scale. The more powerful the tractor, the more weight it carried, and the more traction it required. To break this cycle, designers looked to an extended chassis with 3 bogies per side and overlapping road wheels, a system inherited from earlier experiments by Hansa Lloyd and Krauss-Maffei. The aim was a continuous footprint distributing 18 tons across 12 pairs of wheels, granting stability where wheels alone would sink. By 1936, drawings of what would become the Sd.Kfz. 9 circulated among procurement officers. It was longer than any other German half-track, its bonnet towering over engineers like a small locomotive. The projected towing capacity promised a new logistical freedom. Heavy artillery could be repositioned without railway dependence, and tank recovery teams could operate at the front rather than behind it. To the planners in Berlin, the machine was as strategic as a new weapon system. To the engineers at Breslau, it was an industrial riddle: how to make mass and movement coexist. Testing prototypes on rough proving grounds revealed the brutal demands of torque, gear ratios, and clutch strength. Ordinary transmissions disintegrated under stress. The Maybach HL108 engine, producing 270 horsepower, strained against its own drivetrain. Yet each failure was instructive. Metallurgists adjusted alloys, designers reinforced frames, and FAMO's workshops echoed with the iterative discipline that defined German engineering of the era. Every crack recorded, every weld annotated. Out of that repetition came refinement. Beyond its mechanical birth, the FAMO symbolized a wider philosophy, that logistics could be weaponized. The vehicle's bulk carried not just equipment, but doctrine, the certainty that an army which could move its heaviest assets at will possessed an invisible advantage. Where the Allies still balanced between wheels and tracks, Germany pursued both in unison, building a lineage of half-tracks that filled every logistical niche. The FAMO would stand at the top of that pyramid, its number, Sd.Kfz 9, marking it as the apex of traction technology before the war even began. In this machine, the Wehrmacht found a form of insurance, a vehicle designed not for battle but for endurance. It represented a shift from conquest by aggression to conquest by engineering foresight. And as Europe slid toward conflict, the silent demand for mobility, for the power to move mountains of steel, would make the FAMO indispensable before its first battlefield appearance. Before the war, design rooms in Breslau and Berlin hummed with a peculiar optimism. The engineers of FAMO and their partners at Vomag and Tatra believed that the modern battlefield could be mastered by mathematics. Geometry would replace guesswork. A properly calculated half-track could cross any terrain. The FAMO was to be proof that precision could move mountains. The concept drawings carried a brutal elegance, an elongated chassis, a wide-spaced suspension of 12 overlapping wheels, and a pair of drive sprockets biting into reinforced tracks. The cab, framed in angular steel, seated a crew of 3, driver, mechanic, and commander, each encased within a cockpit of levers and gauges. Every contour answered a question of stress, weight, or balance. Nothing ornamental remained. To the Heereswaffenamt, the vision extended beyond a single vehicle. They sought a mechanical ecosystem, a family of machines sharing engines, transmissions, and spare parts. The FAMO would crown this hierarchy, its Maybach HL108T delivering 270 horsepower through a semi-automatic Maybach Varidrive gearbox. Yet to make such complexity reliable, the Germans approached engineering as a discipline of patience. Every new feature was interrogated, simplified, then reforged until it could be manufactured on ordinary tooling. Inside FAMO's drafting halls, the philosophy of Überdimensionierung, over-engineering, guided every decision. Shafts were made thicker than necessary. Brackets were doubled in case of field fatigue. The result was excess weight, but also a resilience rare for the time. The FAMO would become one of the few wartime vehicles capable of continuous service from North Africa's heat to Russia's winter without major redesign. Its endurance began on the engineer's table. The project drew on the intellectual capital of Germany's interwar motor industry. Maybach supplied power plants, ZF produced transmissions, Bosch provided electrics. The cooperation blurred the line between military and civilian innovation. What emerged was not a weapon, but a moving laboratory for the nation's mechanical ambitions. In that synthesis lay the paradox of German war production, artistry devoted to utility. Contemporary memoranda reveal a meticulous attention to human factors. Controls were to be light enough for a gloved driver, maintenance points reachable without removing armor. The cab was open to the air, sacrificing protection for visibility, acknowledging that its mission was not to fight, but to serve. Even comfort had a strategic value. A crew that could work long hours without exhaustion was a logistical multiplier. By 1938, prototype orders were authorized. The design, still bearing the corporate marks of FAMO, Vomag and Tatra, entered the testing phase under the watchful eye of army inspectors. Drawings multiplied, each revision annotated in tight Gothic script. Verstärkung des Rahmens, reinforcement of the frame, Kühlung verbessert, cooling improved. It was as if the language itself bent to the rhythm of machinery. There was a quiet pride among the designers, a belief that they were building something elemental. In a period when Germany's political leadership spoke of destiny, its engineers spoke of torque, tensile strength, and the coefficient of friction. Their religion was reliability. Their altar was the drafting board. The vision of the FAMO was therefore not an act of invention, but of translation, turning the ideal of unstoppable motion into steel and track. Its success would be measured not in speed, but in the absence of failure. When later crews described it as der Unermüdliche, the tireless one, they unknowingly honored the faith of the men who first traced its silhouette in pencil and ink. The first production line at FAMO's Breslau works looked more like a shipyard than an automotive hall. Each chassis stretched over 9 meters, its framework riveted and bolted by teams moving in practice silence. Sparks fell like snowfall along the gantries, lighting the air with the glow of industrial confidence. What emerged from that rhythm was not a prototype, but a principle made tangible. The process began with the heart of the machine. The Maybach HL108T engine, 12 cylinders in a perfect V, tested on stands before installation. Mechanics checked the timing gear with brass feeler gauges, listening to the note of combustion like musicians tuning an orchestra. The gearbox followed, a marvel of heavy engineering weighing half a ton on its own, its gears hardened to withstand the punishing torque of recovery operations. The FAMO's frame was a study in compromise, enormous yet supple, designed to flex without fracture. Engineers described it as a moving bridge. Over this skeleton, armor plate steel sheets were bolted rather than welded, easing wartime maintenance. Along each side, 6 Schachtelaufwerk bogies interleaved their wheels, distributing the load so evenly that the vehicle's footprint rivaled a tracked tank. Each wheel assembly required precise alignment. A fraction of error meant failure under strain. In these workshops, error had no refuge. As production expanded, sub-assemblies were distributed among Germany's industrial partners. Vomag built chassis components. Tatra supplied parts for the cooling systems. At FAMO, final assembly continued under a regimen of inspection that bordered on obsession. Every clutch engagement was tested, every bearing inspected under magnification. The war's urgency had not yet stripped German manufacturing of its method. Perfection remained policy. Then came the fitting of the winch, the FAMO's defining feature. Mounted behind the crew cabin, the 15-ton winch drum coiled its steel cable like a serpent of industry. Driven directly by the gearbox through a secondary shaft, it could drag immobilized armor across terrain that swallowed lesser vehicles. Recovery crews later described the sound of the winch in action as a slow thunder, a testament to mechanical leverage made audible. The electrical system was modest: 2 12-volt batteries, twin magnetos, and a starting motor robust enough to stir a small locomotive. The instrument panel, austere and efficient, offered no luxury, only clarity. Temperature, oil pressure, and engine speed, the 3 vital signs of a living machine. In the cab, the driver's hands rested on a wheel nearly half a meter in diameter, commanding 18 tons through the delicate mediation of hydraulic brakes and manual gears. The scale was immense, yet control remained human. Each completed vehicle underwent factory trials, engines run for hours, tracks tested on gradients, braking distances recorded. Inspectors measured exhaust temperature, fuel consumption, and even the resonance of the chassis under load. When a FAMO passed these rituals, it was stamped, numbered, and prepared for delivery, an industrial sacrament completed. By 1940, the assembly halls at Breslau operated under the tempo of total mobilization. Skilled workers were joined by conscripts, apprentices, and foreign labour, yet the rhythm endured. The FAMO rolled out at a steady pace, its serial plates marking the advance of an idea through steel and sweat. Each unit carried within it the cumulative precision of hundreds of hands and thousands of decisions. Photographs from the period show rows of half-tracks gleaming under factory lights, their massive wheels aligned like ranks on parade. The air itself seemed to vibrate with expectation. What these workers could not foresee was that their creation would outlast the war that demanded it. Built for recovery, it would itself be recovered, restored, and remembered as a monument to mechanical discipline. In its making, the FAMO revealed the essence of German engineering, not speed, not flair, but the confidence of structure. It was machinery as philosophy, endurance cast in metal. When the first convoys of FAMO left the Breslau works, the war was already spreading across the continent. Their debut was not in triumphal parade, but in the quiet realism of recovery columns following panzer divisions into Poland, France, and the Soviet Union. The machines met the battlefield exactly as designed, not to fight, but to restore motion where it had failed. The proving ground of the FAMO was never a laboratory. It was mud, deep, adhesive, unrelenting mud. Reports from the Eastern Front described the 18-ton tractors sinking to their axles, while winching immobilized armour free. Crews learned to work in pairs, one FAMO anchoring another, while both strained against 40 tons of dead weight. In the cold, steel cables stiffened like iron bars. In the thaw, they hissed through the mire with lethal force. The men who handled them spoke of the machine not as vehicle, but as companion, a patient, uncomplaining labourer. On the Russian steppes, the FAMO's Maybach engine became a paradox. It was both a marvel and a liability. Tuned for precision, it required high-octane fuel and meticulous maintenance, luxuries that retreated with every mile eastward. Yet even when starved and frozen, many continued to run, their massive radiators steaming in the sub-zero dawn. Field workshops stripped parts from wrecked units, improvising repairs that kept the fleet alive. The Germans had built a machine to survive the impossible, and in this it succeeded. Operational doctrine evolved around its presence. Recovery platoons were formed, each centred on a pair of Sd.Kfz 9s, supported by mechanics and a supply truck. Together they were the invisible scaffold of the panzer divisions. A battle might be won by tanks, but it was sustained by these half-tracks dragging the damaged back to service. Photographs from the time show their immense silhouettes beside crippled machines, evidence of an unspoken hierarchy of steel serving steel. In North Africa, the FAMO confronted another kind of trial. The desert demanded cooling, not traction. Crews removed side panels to vent heat and fitted improvised sand filters to the carburetors. Even under the glare of the Sahara, the tractors hauled disabled vehicles across dunes where ordinary trucks surrendered. At El Alamein, they towed not only German armour but captured Allied tanks, their tracks leaving parallel scars across the sand that marked the path of salvage rather than conquest. The Western Front provided its final examination. As fuel shortages deepened and air superiority passed to the Allies, FAMOs became nocturnal. They moved at night, recovering under blackout conditions, engines muted by improvised mufflers. Many were destroyed by aircraft before reaching their destinations, yet their crews persisted. The machine's reputation within the Wehrmacht grew from respect to reverence, the one vehicle that never refused a task. The engineers who had built it studied the field reports with forensic attention. Failures of clutch linings, fractured drive shafts, overheating. Each was logged and relayed back to Breslau. Wartime production could not incorporate every improvement, But the information formed a living archive of endurance. The FAMO was being tested beyond its design, and in that crucible, it proved its character. Observers from Allied intelligence, examining captured examples, noted the same qualities: extraordinary tractive power, reliable transmission, and an almost excessive structural integrity. To move one required several recovery vehicles in return. In a war of destruction, it was an instrument of preservation. By 1944, the FAMO had become both legend and liability. Its size and weight made transport difficult, its fuel appetite immense. Yet no lighter vehicle could replace it. When Germany's industries faltered under bombardment, the FAMO's continued operation was testimony to craftsmanship that had outlasted policy. In a sense, it had already passed its test, to demonstrate that mechanical virtue could survive even within a failing system. And so, the 18-ton tractor earned its quiet distinction, not as a weapon of offence, but as the last word in wartime engineering discipline. Wherever steel lay broken, it answered with motion. It proved that in war, as in industry, the truest measure of power is persistence. By 1943, the FAMO had become an irreplaceable cog in the Wehrmacht's crumbling machine. But success in engineering can turn to paradox in strategy. The more indispensable the FAMO became, the more visible its limitations appeared. Its immense weight strained bridges, its bulk slowed convoys, and its appetite for fuel bordered on gluttony. In the logic of total war, efficiency had no patience for masterpieces. Attempts to lighten or simplify the design met reality. There was no smaller substitute capable of matching its power. The Germans produced roughly 2,500 units across all variants, a modest number compared to the need. At Kursk, Stalingrad, and later in Italy, there were simply too few FAMOs to rescue the wrecks that littered the battlefields. The machine's strength was bound to its rarity, a triumph of engineering trapped in the arithmetic of attrition. The engineers responded with adaptation rather than abandonment. They produced specialized subtypes: the Sd.Kfz, 9/1 fitted with a 6-ton crane, and the 9/2 with a 10-ton variant. These became mobile workshops, capable of lifting turrets, removing engines, and conducting field repairs where none had been thought possible. Such versions blurred the boundary between tractor and factory, an early glimpse of modular battlefield logistics that modern armies still employ. Yet, for all their ingenuity, these refinements could not alter the course of the war. As the Allied bombing campaign crippled German industry, FAMO's Breslau works were repeatedly struck. Replacement parts dwindled, production slowed to a crawl, crews cannibalized damaged vehicles to keep others running, and the once immaculate machines began to show the scars of exhaustion: missing panels, improvised exhausts, mismatched tires. In these battle-worn shapes, the perfection of the drawing office gave way to the pragmatism of survival. Still, even in decline, the FAMO astonished. On retreat through Italy's Apennines, recovery columns dragged damaged armor up mountain passes that defeated ordinary transport. Drivers learned to steer by instinct, balancing 18 tons on narrow roads carved into rock. Witnesses recalled seeing the FAMO crest ridges with engines roaring like low thunder, the steel cable taut between life and loss. To those men, the machine was no failure. It was defiance made mechanical. The true failure lay elsewhere, in the state that demanded excellence without endurance. FAMO's builders had created a vehicle that embodied the discipline of industry, yet that industry itself was devoured by ideology. The tractor outlived the doctrine. Even as the Reich collapsed, Allied recovery teams encountered Sd.Kfz, 9s still operational, towing wrecks from roads now crowded with refugees. Their final service was not to Germany, but to the human need to move forward. Measured against its brief, the FAMO never failed. It did what it was designed to do, under conditions its designers could scarcely have imagined. Its limits were not mechanical but moral, proof that in war the finest machines are too often harnessed to broken purposes. The war consumed every principle of design it touched, and the FAMO was no exception. Its technical perfection concealed a deeper cost, the industrial and human toll of maintaining such a machine under siege. The FAMO factory at Breslau, once a symbol of disciplined production, became a portrait of exhaustion by 1944. Labour shortages forced the introduction of foreign and forced workers, many drawn from occupied Europe. The machine that represented the peak of German engineering was built increasingly by hands that did not belong to Germany. Surviving documents from the FAMO works reveal the quiet desperation of an industry still functioning amid collapse. Records note shortages of copper, rubber, and precision tools. Substitute metals replaced high-grade alloys. Wiring insulation grew brittle. Yet the output continued, because to stop was to admit defeat. The engineering culture that had built the FAMO could not surrender to inefficiency, even as the nation around it dissolved. Each completed FAMO carried with it layers of contradiction. Beneath the painted numbers lay components sourced from dozens of subcontractors scattered across occupied territories. Czech factories produced parts beside Polish ones, each shipment a silent network of coercion and necessity. The logistical achievement that once symbolized Germany's prowess now mirrored its dependence on conquest. The FAMO, conceived as an emblem of self-reliance, had become a machine of empire, sustained by the labor of the unwilling. There were moral costs as well as material ones. Recovery crews, tasked with saving tanks rather than men, often found themselves retrieving machines from battlefields still strewn with the dead. In their diaries, they wrote not of victories, but of silence, the sound of engines starting beside the wrecks of comrades. The FAMO had no weaponry, its strength was service, but service without choice becomes burden, and burden without reflection becomes complicity. Propaganda photographs of the time show the FAMO as a triumph of German resolve, its half-track wheels gleaming, its crew immaculate. None depict the exhaustion, the cold, or the moral fatigue. Yet even those staged images tell a truth, that the vehicle had become both symbol and illusion. In its steel form lay a national faith in engineering as salvation, a belief that technical mastery could redeem strategic failure. After 1943, this faith fractured. Reports from field workshops began to note the same refrain: vehicle worn beyond repair, spares unobtainable. Mechanics stripped one FAMO to repair another, a mechanical cannibalism that paralleled the political self-consumption of the regime it served. By the final months of war, the few surviving examples were reduced to civilian tasks, hauling supplies, evacuating wounded, even pulling carts when fuel ran dry. The machine built for motion now symbolized endurance in retreat. Yet, from the perspective of pure engineering, the FAMO left behind a different legacy, the idea that logistics could be treated as art. Every problem it solved, traction, torque, temperature, fatigue, became a lesson recorded in manuals and memoranda. After the war, those documents would circulate among Allied engineers studying the captured vehicles. They found not propaganda, but method, an approach to problem-solving that transcended ideology. This was the hidden consequence, that even the machinery of a defeated nation could enrich the world's technical inheritance. Out of ruin came reference. The FAMO's design influenced post-war tractors, recovery vehicles, and industrial crawlers built in Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. The lessons written in the grease-stained notebooks of Breslau's engineers would find their way into peacetime machines that pulled bridges, cleared rubble, and rebuilt the continent their ancestors had helped destroy. In that sense, the FAMO's greatest effect was invisible, a quiet transmission of knowledge from war to reconstruction, from destruction to endurance. When peace returned to Europe, the FAMO lingered in the margins of both history and geography. A few remained abandoned where they had failed, rusting beneath pine forests, half buried in Polish mud, or hidden in barns long after the front had passed. Others, captured intact, were pressed into service by the victors. The Allies recognized the tractor's worth immediately. In the British zone of occupation, recovered FAMOs were used to tow disabled lorries and aircraft. In the East, the Red Army remarked them with Cyrillic numbers and folded them into its recovery regiments. The vehicle built for the Reich found new life serving its former enemies. One such example crossed decades to reach the Donington Grand Prix collection in England, restored with meticulous care. The sight of its immense half-tracks and open cab, repainted in neutral grey, transformed an engine of war into a museum piece of rare dignity. Visitors could climb beside the driver's seat, touch the heavy gear lever, and imagine the machine in motion once more. There was nothing aggressive about it now, only the scale of ambition rendered harmless by time. In France and the Soviet Union, surviving FAMOs became training aids. Their disassembled gearboxes and winches were studied by engineers, learning how precision could survive hardship. Kubinka's tank museum still displays a captured half-track under soft lighting, its steel panels marked by decades of weather, the Maybach engine restored to silent completeness. Each bolt and lever there is testimony not just to wartime industry, but to the continuity of mechanical knowledge. The vehicle's design lineage did not vanish. Post-war tractors, such as the Fawn Heavy series and Soviet KZKT recovery machines, borrowed elements of its chassis balance and transmission geometry. Even civilian industries adopted the FAMO's logic of distributed load, applying it to logging crawlers and road construction machinery. The same configuration that once pulled tanks from battle now built roads across the ruins they left behind. Collectors who restored these vehicles in later decades often described a peculiar respect for them. The FAMO demanded space, tools, and patience, virtues that mirrored those of its original creators. To restore one was to reconstruct a fragment of history where craft overcame circumstance. When its Maybach engine turned over after half a century of silence, the sound was less a resurrection than an echo, proof that what had been built with discipline could endure beyond ideology. In the museums of Europe, it now stands beside the machines it once rescued. Visitors pass from tanks to tractors, often pausing longer at the latter. Perhaps it is scale that captivates, or perhaps the humility of its purpose. It did not destroy, it moved. It did not command, it obeyed. Yet, without it, the engines of war would have ground to a halt long before their defeat. The legacy, then, is not heroism but endurance, the quiet power of design that survives its own necessity. In its steel, one can read the entire trajectory of 20th century engineering, the dream of mastery, the discipline of manufacture, and the return to utility. It remains a relic not of conquest, but of what human precision can achieve even amid chaos. Time has a way of stripping machines of their context until only their essence remains. In the quiet halls of museums and private collections, the Sd.Kfz 9 no longer wears its insignia or its mission. Its steel is unpainted, its engine clean, its purpose abstract. It stands as a question. What does a civilization's engineering reveal about its character? To the untrained eye, it is simply enormous, half-track, half-truck, all determination. But for those who study its bolts and welds, it represents something subtler, a belief that precision could command chaos. The engineers who designed it imagined order so strong it might carry a world at war, and for a time it did. It hauled broken armor from fields of snow and sand. It carried the burden of ambition itself, and it proved that a perfect mechanism can exist even in an imperfect cause. In retrospect, the FAMO is both marvel and monument. Its measurements still align, its gears still turn, yet the world that required it has vanished. What endures is not the ideology that ordered its creation, but the principle that shaped it, discipline in the service of motion, a design that answered need with structure and structure with grace. The historian sees in it a chapter of logistics. The engineer sees in it a lesson in traction, but the human eye sees something simpler, endurance made visible. The FAMO's story reminds us that engineering, at its finest, transcends its moment. Even built for war, it becomes a language of continuity, a proof that ingenuity, once expressed, cannot be confined to a single purpose. So, the FAMO stands silent now, the hum of its Maybach replaced by the hush of visitors who trace its outlines with wonder. They find in its stillness not the echo of battle, but the rhythm of craft, a reminder that even amid the machinery of war there exists a lineage of creation untouched by ideology, and that, perhaps, is the true weight the FAMO continues to bear, not the memory of conquest, but the quiet dignity of work.